everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read from January 19th through January 25th. Though I will note, the first book that I talk about, I actually finished on January 18th, so it should have been in my last recent reads, but I didn't want to just leave it out, so we're just going to group it with this week's. So first up, I'm going to talk about these next books all together because they're all part of the series, and that is books 2 through 6 of the third arc of 6 from the Warrior series. This first one is the one that I technically finished last week. So first up, we have Dark River, which I gave 4.25 stars. Then Outcast, which I gave 4 stars. Eclipse, which I gave 4.5 stars. Long Shadows, which I gave 4.25 stars. And Sunrise, which I gave 4.5 stars. So, if you're new to my channel, I have been doing a reread of the Warriors series, and Warriors follows groups of forest cats who live together in like little clans, and we follow ThunderClan. We get to see how ThunderClan deals with not only their own clanmates and threats in the forest, but also with the other clans who they don't always get along with. In this set of 6, we're following 3 characters who start as kits and work their way up to warriors throughout the series. One of my favorite characters in the whole series is in these books. I hadn't realized how much I had forgotten about these books. I believe it is Outcast, and the entire plot of Outcast I had completely forgotten ever happened. Like, just like I'm reading, I'm like, wait a minute. They did that in this book? Really? So I definitely am glad that I gave these books a reread. Again, it was quite interesting to see the different perspectives in this arc of 6 as opposed to the previous 2 arcs of 6. I know there are some twists and turns in these books that I can distinctly remember just being jaw-dropping and kind of coming out of nowhere. But like, in hindsight, so obvious, especially on the reread, I was like, oh my gosh. They had laid hints throughout all of the books that made it make sense at the end. I had forgotten what a kind of cliffhanger it ended on, and I am so looking forward to picking up the next arc of 6 to see what happens next, because that is the arc of 6 that I haven't finished. I think I got through like book 4 or maybe 5, but I never finished book 6, so I have no idea how that arc ends. And obviously, given how much I forgot about this arc, I can't imagine that there wasn't a ton of stuff that I forgot about the next arc too, so I'm really looking forward to picking those up. Next up, I read Murder on Mistletoe by Robin Stevens, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This is, I think, the 5th book in the Murder Most Unladylike series. This time we follow Daisy and Hazel as they are celebrating Christmas. Daisy manages to convince her aunt, who works at a college, to let her and Hazel come stay with her. This college is nearby to the one her brother is attending, and she is looking forward to getting to see her brother for the holidays. While there, they find out that one of the boys that Daisy's brother goes to school with is being pranked, and they decide that they kind of want to get to the bottom of it. They start investigating that, but not long after, one of Daisy's brother's schoolmates ends up dead, and so they then have an even bigger mystery to investigate. I am still really, really loving this series. I again had absolutely no idea who did it. Robin Stevens does a fantastic job of writing mysteries where I just can't quite figure out who did it in the end, and I love that in mystery thrillers where I can't figure out who did it. I continue to enjoy seeing Daisy and Hazel's growth and how they have changed as characters from book 1 to now. That was one of the things that I was really hoping for after reading book 1, was that we would get to see some growth, and we for sure have. I am quite looking forward to reading the next book in this series, as it has become one of my favorites. Next up, I read Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. Emilia and her twin sister Vittoria are witches. They live in a time where they have to hide what they are or risk death. One night, Vittoria is brutally murdered, and Emilia vows to find the killer and make them pay no matter what the cost. She ends up crossing paths with Wrath, one of the princes of hell who her grandmother has warned her about. Wrath claims to want to help her and states that he had nothing to do with her sister's death. Emilia works with him but doesn't completely trust him. The only thing she cares about is finding out the truth about what happened to her sister. So this book started off a bit slow for me. It took me a little while to get into the flow of it and to really get invested in the characters. I enjoyed getting to see Emilia's interactions with Wrath. It was quite interesting to know that Wrath was holding stuff back, but at the same time, you didn't know what those things were and whether he could be trusted any more than Emilia did. I also really loved how the book showed just how much Emilia loved her sister and the length she was willing to go to find out the truth of what happened to her sister. Even though this wasn't my favorite book that I've read this week, I do plan to continue on with the series when the second book comes out, as it left in a place where I am very curious to see what happens next, because I was not expecting this book to end the way that it did. Next up, I read Ghosts of Green Glass House by Kate Milford, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this book, we are back at Green Glass House, which is an inn for smugglers. We are once again following Milo, and it is Christmas time, as a year has gone by since the events of the first book. Milo is once again hoping for a quiet holiday, but then some old friends show up, as do some unannounced, unexpected guests, and the inn is soon full. Then some items go missing, and Milo tries to figure out who took the items and why, and if the guests are who they say they are. I enjoyed this book far more than the first one. So I think part of that is because one of the things Milo does is kind of develop a character that is a little different from himself. It's kind of based on like Dungeons and Dragons, like a role-playing game. I didn't know much about that in the first book, and I believe the author kind of went into it assuming that not everybody would, so there was a lot of explanation of how something like that would work and how that affected how Milo behaved. And so it took me a little bit to get into that book because I was trying to understand how all that worked. And with this book, I already knew because I had read the first one. So Kate Milford didn't have to go as in-depth with her explanation, as I'm sure she was assuming that if we're reading this book, we've read book one. So we already kind of know the gist of what's going on. I quite enjoyed the mystery aspect of this book, as with all of these people kind of unexpectedly turning up, and then the items going missing, you're like very confused as to how the items went missing and where they are and who could have took them and why. And I did not manage to figure that out. And like I said earlier, I love when a mystery can manage to stump me. I also really loved the end of this story, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in book 3. Next up, I read Strawberry Shortcake Murder by Joanne Fluke, and I gave this book 2.5 stars. This follows Hannah, who works at a bakery, and when another body turns up, she is once again drawn into the investigation. The mystery part of this book was good, but I did take some issue with some things that were said. There were, I think, a couple uses of the R word, which I did not like. And there was a scene where Hannah talks about how she's going to use this notebook, and it's a notebook she's used for a long time, but she can't get it anymore because there is a Native American chief on the cover. And she talks about how in Lake Eden, the word Indian isn't racially charged or anything. It's just a word. She also talks about how there is a man who lives there who is Native American, but doesn't think that the term Native American is appropriate because he has relatives who came from Siberia, and that means he's technically not a Native American. And I believe she even says something about it being politically correct or something. I listened to this on audiobooks, so it's kind of hard to remember, but I do remember seeing a Goodreads review that had the passage, so let me look that up. And then I can read the passage because I think it's important to understand how it was put. And like I said, I was listening to this, so it was kind of one of those things where I listened to it and I was like, wait a minute, that's kind of odd. And it left me with this like odd feeling. And then I believe after that, the R word is used, and that gave me an even worse feeling. And that's when I started looking up reviews to see if anybody else had noticed this stuff and it had bothered them as well. And it kind of took me out of the rest of the book, hence why the book has such a low rating. But the passage said, "They didn't make Big Chief tablets anymore. Hannah knew because she tried to buy one recently. It probably had something to do with the new political correctness campaign. If the politicians had their way, the Indian chief on the tablet would now be called a Native American community leader. In Lake Eden, Minnesota, Indian wasn't a racially biased word. John Walker, the full-blooded Chippewa who manned the prescription counter at Lake Eden Neighborhood Pharmacy, had explained that Native American was a misnomer. He'd done some research, and he believed that his ancestors had come to North America from Siberia and conquered the indigenous people." So that scene right there kind of took me out of things. This book was written in 2001, so maybe that is part of it, that it is just a product of the time when it was written. But having, like I said, that scene and then a couple uses of the R word really bothered me. Like, it was kind of jarring. And on top of that, that scene had absolutely no influence on the plot whatsoever. Like, that scene could have been cut out and the book would be exactly the same. So it felt like it was just thrown in there for no good reason, other than to kind of make a political statement, which I really didn't like. And I'm not sure if I want to continue on with the series. I would love to know what you think, if you guys have an opinion on whether you think I should continue on with the series or not. So give me your thoughts and feedback. Let me know in the comment section below. But yeah, it just really, really took me out of the story. And so despite enjoying the mystery aspect, I just couldn't give it more than 2.5 stars. And that's probably me being a little bit generous, actually. The last book I read is The Blood of Olympus by Rick Riordan, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is the final book in the Heroes of Olympus series. I don't want to say anything about the plot because, again, spoilers, and it actually would contain spoilers for the Percy Jackson series, and I don't want to spoil that for any of you as well. So in this book, we're kind of wrapping everything up, like the journey the characters have been on in the last 4 books. This is kind of the epic conclusion, and I thought it was really well paced, and I really liked how it kind of all came together in the end. I'm really interested to see if his next series, we get to see some of these characters, because I believe there is one more series that's kind of set in this world. I could be wrong about that, but I think there is. One of the things I really, really liked about this series as a whole was how Rick Riordan managed to introduce us to new characters and new Greek myths and stuff like that, while still giving us some of the old familiar touches that we knew from the Percy Jackson series. And I like that it continued throughout all 5 books. There was stuff in every single book that, if you're a fan of Percy Jackson, it kind of felt like coming home. And so I really, really enjoyed this series. And I'm looking forward to picking up more books from Rick Riordan, and hopefully some that are in this world. So these are some of the books I've read recently. What is a book that you've read recently and either loved or hated? Also, please let me know what you think about the Hannah Swenson mysteries and whether you think I should continue reading them or not. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me eye emojis in the comments section below. Like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!